just gonna put my foot on the floor and I'm not lifting till I see God or a checkered flag.
Hello, welcome back to Racing Thoughts and IndyCar Podcast. I'm Megan Dennis.
And I'm Meg Taylor.
And we are here to discuss everything that has been in the last week with the 500 and everything that is kind of come out of that. Again, if you have feedback from our last episode, changing up that format, we're keeping with that this time, really kind of discussing the big kind of takeaways. So we would love to hear thoughts. Getting started, I guess, this all kind of, not all, but most of our news does tie into the 500 overall. Okay, really just kind of talking about where we kind of left off on the Monday we recorded last. We knew everything had just happened with Team Penske. Everything had come down about we knew the cars were starting at the back of the grid, but that's kind of where we had left things. Following that, we had some news come out to really kind of say that Roger Penske is setting a precedence to he is not okay with how this looks for him as a team, for him as a owner, for everything that is the 500, and the fact that this has happened twice in the last year and some change. With this, we had three kind of major firings. So if you were to look at kind of the Team Penske structures and you take those top three people that they have, you could rip that off the top of the page as they are now gone. With this, we've had three firings that have occurred, starting with Tim Cindric, who is team president. He's been team president of Team Penske since 2005. He's been with the team since 1999. He was chief strategist of the number 2 car, so Joseph Newgarden's car. Tim had already said at the beginning of this season that he was wanting to take a little bit of a step back. So he had gone from being team president of all of Penske, like Team Penske in all forms of their racing, to just working with IndyCar as of this season. But now he has gone after, a very, very long career with Penske. Additionally, Ron, I'm sorry, Ruski? I'm sorry, Ron. I don't know how to say your last name. Something of that nature. Who was IndyCar managing director for Team Penske. Essentially, he was in charge of basically all their day-to-day operations. As far as that would happen, he'd been with Team Penske since 2005. He was also chief strategist, people on the 12 car, so Will Power's car. And then lastly, the one that came out of this was the general manager of Team Penske, Al Moyer, was let go as well. He has been the chief strategist of the number 3. So we're seeing, not just the guys at the top of the organization, but the top guys for each individual car go. Kyle had been with Scott since he's come into IndyCar and since 2021. All three of these guys, had been with their individual cars for a very, very long time too. So that's kind of who's been fired. Meg, thoughts?
I think this comes as no surprise considering how vocal I've been with my dislike of how Penske has been doing things recently. So the fact that Roger Penske has come out and stated how against it he is, he's earned a little bit more respect in my eyes. I don't think he had a ton to begin with for me, but he's definitely earned a lot back from, these, top 3 guys, whether or not these 3 people were directly involved. I don't know. We will probably never know. But, when something like this happens and it happens more than once, the people who are in charge are going to be the ones that should take the fall for such a gross oversight. Again, twice. So I'm happy that they're gone. Again, whether or not that they had direct involvement, I don't know. But someone has to, claim responsibility for it. And I think these 3 people are the ones who should take responsibility for it and are kind of getting what they put out there. So shout out to Roger Penske, I guess, as if, I think there's been a lot of discourse as well over social media and just like people in general who have also been very unhappy with kind of how Roger Penske is the top guy for so many things. And now there is that conversation that I had brought up last episode of, well, what does this conflict of interest actually look like in all of these scenarios? And, now I'm actually I'm interested to see where it goes from here. So, props to Roger Penske for actually making a really hard decision with firing 3 people who have been with the team for a very, very long time and 3 incredibly prominent people. But they're still on thin ice because, again, it has happened twice in a year that there's been a cheating scandal directly within Team Penske itself. So who's to say what's going to happen in the future? But hopefully with the firings of these people, maybe that kind of solves that issue. But at least the conversation's being had about that conflict of interest. But then it's also like Roger Penske is kind of taking a stand where it's like, no, I don't like this. And I can respect that. It's very interesting. We'll see, I guess.
I think along with that, two things I want to bring up with that. First, I was listening to Off Track, and Rossi made a point that he was talking to somebody from Penske, and that they were like, from a strategy standpoint, we're going to be fine. Like with the 500, this is pre 500. It's not just one person who's making all these calls. Like, it's going to be a shift, but that's going to be fine. What really is going to be interesting is the day-to-day operational shift that's about to happen, because everyone who handles, not the on-track stuff, but the logistics of what are they doing to get to Detroit? What all needs to go where and everything. That's what's now. They don't know who's doing that. They don't know what that's going to look like, what that structure is going to look like. So that actually may be something as we're going into this week and going into Detroit this upcoming weekend. It's Wednesday that we're recording this. Just kind of see, what is that looking from a Penske standpoint. I think also something that is worth noting that came out of what Roger said, and for anyone who's listening, if you have not actually gone and watched the video that Roger Penske did his sit down with Jamie Little with Fox, go listen to that, because I think it's really clear that, like, conflict of interest aside of it, and yes, there is one, Roger is aware of that, but he first and foremost does love this series. He cares about IndyCar being successful. He cares about, the Penske Entertainment side of things being successful, not just Team Penske, the IndyCar entity. And I think that's important to keep in mind of like IMS IndyCar as kind of those separate things. And with that, he addressed it as well as Doug Bowles addressed it. So current president of IndyCar. IndyCar is currently putting into works, and apparently actually has been for the last couple of years. It's been a conversation of when it comes back to the same conversation we had on the last episode of, okay, what's happening with these technical inspections? Clearly stuff is getting missed here, and we're going to talk about that kind of almost more later on with stuff that came out of the after the 500. With that, IndyCar is trying to make their own separate body that's completely separate from the series of kind of outside technical regs people, because it's kind of multifaceted of like, IndyCar wants to make sure that they're not having that kind of conflict of interest of who is looking at the tech specs of all the cars, as well as they are realizing that Rocket, as one person and his team of like 3 or 4 people, cannot handle being able to do all of this on their own. There's a lot of stuff that comes to this, but at some point, the reality is just the fact that these are human errors. These are people that are looking at it. And when you have a lot of cars in a tight window to be able to get through, it does make sense at some point that, like, I would like to think of no fault of their own, that things just happen to get missed. It's not excusing it, but it's just that's the reality of like, this is human error. These are humans looking at this thing. And I'm not saying we need to bring in like some AI technology to do that, not by any means, but like, this is just, I think the fact that IndyCar is saying, hey, this is a problem, and yeah, it's getting brought to the forefront now because we just had this big issue that occurred, again, in more ways than one, because we're going to touch about that with the 3 cars that got disqualified after the race as well. But with that, also recognizing that we need this to be an outside body. We need to take any bias that could occur out of it, and the fact that this has been not just a right now, oh, we need to happen because something happened. It's, we've been working on this for a couple of years. Now, are we going to see that in the 2025 season? We're not. Just the logistics of it are not going to be able to be put into place this year. But it's nice to know that this is very actively being worked on. It's something that since Doug took over in January, he's been saying, I want this, and we're going to keep pushing to get it done. So I think that'll be a space to continue to watch and what is that looking like. And I think we're going to see the technical inspections of stuff kind of ramp up even more following what has happened throughout the whole of the month of May.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense. Like, I think you have the AMR safety team. That's an entirely separate entity that follows, from track to track to track. And I think if we have an entirely separate entity of just, the technical inspection, like you said, it takes a lot of the bias out of it. And it does come down to human error, I think, in this instance of, well, things were missed, but, like you said, we had a really tight window. There's a very short turnaround time. And those types of things do kind of get missed. They fall through the cracks. And it's good to know that it is actively being worked on. So hopefully we see something along the lines of like the AMR safety team being a separate, whole thing that works with IndyCar as the series to, get better and better. So that way we don't have all of these things happen in terms of, pre-race inspections and post-race inspections. So we'll see, I guess. But that's actually very encouraging because that was honestly my biggest gripe with the whole situation is like, how could this have happened when we do have all of these, inspections that go on pre and post? Again, human error. It's a small team. Things happen, but that doesn't make it okay. So I'm interested to see where that goes.
I concur. And so we will, once we hear something, we'll circle back to all of that. Next bit of news is not really news, but for anyone who's been listening to the podcast for a while, this is news important to me in my heart. Simon Pagino, who is not by
2019
his,
winner.
2019 winner of 500, but by no choice of his own, is a retired IndyCar driver. He was injured on track a few years ago, spinal cord injury, and so he is no longer currently racing, but he has kind of taken more of almost like a driver advisor role in the last couple years with this. I'm sorry, I said spinal cord injury. It was a TBI that Simon Pagino had. That's really kind of made him have to really kind of step back because he just can't drive anymore. It was, either he drives or it's his life type of situation. With that, last year, he started working with Scott McLaughlin in a kind of driver advisor role with that one. And then this year at the 500, he was actually on Scott's pit box helping with everything that went into everything for the month of May. And why did I put this as news? That part's not really news, that's been there. He's actually working now with Theo Porcher, Teddy Porkchop, for those who are in the know. Theo drove in the number 6 last year in the chaos that was everything for that. Go back and listen to past episodes and you can get anything you want to know about that one. Or leave a comment if you don't know, and we can spend time that's not this episode rehashing everything that was the number 6 in McLaren last year. But got dropped, in my opinion, not the best way, but it is what it is as far as that goes. He didn't end up with a seat this year just because there wasn't seats. He's not one of several drivers that could have had a seat, and it just there weren't enough to go around, sort of thing. But Simon is now kind of taking over, working with him as kind of his mentor. I guess that French connection maybe is playing a part with that, with hopefully kind of serving as an advisor, as a mentor, from everything that I'm gathering, kind of get Theo back into IndyCar if that spot were to become available.
I got nothing to add to that. I think, the podcast here, we love Teddy Porkchop. So, I think Simon is an incredible person to kind of be in that mentorship role. And, hopefully we do get Theo back on the grid eventually because, he's fun to watch drive and, he is a personality. So we would love to see that happen.
Yes, most definitely. This is a pro Teddy Porkchop podcast. Next bit, now we'll shift gears. We'll really kind of jump into everything that is the 500. Exciting news. I wouldn't say it's shocking news, so I don't know when it comes to everything that we've talked about this previously, how it plays in, because it is the 500. But we had 7.05 million TV viewers for the 500. This was also a sellout crowd, which is the first since 2016. Mind you, the 2016 crowd was the 100th running of the 500, so that automatically it's an anniversary one. It is not shocking. The fact that this wasn't a anniversary race and we're getting a sellout crowd, big deal. This also meant that there was a lifting of the blackout in Indiana because the Indianapolis viewer area, just since the 60s, has had it in place where there is a blackout where the only way that you are able to see it is if you are at the actual speedway, unless it is a sellout crowd. Because of it being a sellout crowd, that got lifted. And we saw, this was being the most watched 500 since 2008. And with that, I guess from a history standpoint, if you go back and listen to that episode, 2008 marked when the series joined back together. That's the reunification year. So that kind of makes sense that that would have had the most for the 500. So, again, the fact that this wasn't an anniversary year and we're seeing this viewership, I think is really kind of a testament to Fox of like, hey, wow, shocking. The 500 and your opening race where you did your most marketing, you had viewers?
I think it's interesting though. Like, I have to comment on the Indianapolis blackout thing because I think that really bothers me. And I feel so bad for, rehashing it, Megan, because I know we have talked about this at length, but I don't understand why. And if someone can give me a valid reason as to why they black out the entire city that, this is in, just from like an accessibility standpoint, there are people who are unable to actually go for whatever reason. whether that be disability reason, whether that be affordability, whether that is, just working. People with families with, people with young kids who can't actually go to the speedway, whatever the case may be. There are plenty of people within the Indianapolis area who do not have the ability to go to the 500, but who still may want to watch it. So it bothers me from that perspective that is a thing. Again, if someone can tell me a valid reason as to why, maybe that will change my mind. But again, from an accessibility standpoint, I don't agree with that. However, very cool that it was a sellout crowd, not being a anniversary or, any kind of special 500, I guess, other than it's just the 500. I think there was actually a lot of conversations on, news outlets and sports radios and talk shows and stuff like that, where Fox has done a very good job of outreach to get a lot of people, talking about it. Again, from a New England standpoint, like car racing isn't a big deal up here. And so when you have someone who's like Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski being active, people within the 500 run because they are also Fox Sports personalities, all of a sudden you get my tiny like Channel 5 news station is talking about the Indy 500 and they're talking about who had won. But, granted, the majority of that news story was about Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski. But, it's getting mentioned in a very local news station that never would have talked about it before, but it's on, the Fox network of sports. So it's like, okay, that's really cool that, there's a lot more outreach in that capacity and people are talking about it. So we've had our issues with Fox, but overall we've had a lot of improvements. And I think this is really kind of showing how Fox has improved the sport just in general. So that's very cool.
I agree 100%. Again, I want to see what this carries over to Detroit, if it carries over, because I don't like that, if Fox was being smart about this from a marketing standpoint, it should have been like, hey, next week, here's Detroit. Here's some sort of like little preview on Detroit. We'll talk about Detroit and my feelings on it when we get there, but neither here nor there. I think it's just going to, we'll see. We'll see what the viewership numbers carry over with. We don't have a big, I mean, there's no time off. We're going to Detroit on Saturday, or well, Friday. Race is on Sunday, but I don't know. We'll see. We will circle back to this as we always do because I think what Fox is doing and how these viewership numbers compare is interesting. Keep an eye on. All right. So we had two kind of topics that we said last episode we really wanted to circle back on. I will, I guess, kind of defer to you maybe on both of these a little bit, Meg. Starting out with Callum Ilott versus Robert Schwartzman. Of course, Robert started on pole. Callum started somewhere in the middle of the pack. Sorry, Callum.
Yeah, so I think with Callum and Robert, they are both obviously the drivers for Prema as the rookie team. And, Robert had all eyes on him throughout, the entire week leading up to the 500. And one, I just have to say, like, shout out to Robert because he handled it very gracefully and very maturely as a rookie, not only just in this series, but, being a first time pole sitter on a team that historically hasn't had a lot of success just in races in general. He had a ton of sponsors just flood in after he took pole, and rightfully so, because again, he did phenomenal, but he had all eyes on him. And I think that adds an entirely different layer of nerves and pressure that he's probably just not used to. First time on an oval, first time pole sitter, first time at the 500. And the 500 is an entirely different beast just in terms of a physicality standpoint, considering, the necessary stamina that's needed in order to like go through all of it. And I think he pleasantly surprised a lot of people. It is unfortunate how his race had ended. And, if you didn't see, he had crashed in pit lane, and unfortunately, he had ran into some of his pit lane crew. He ran into 4 of his guys and broke his fueler's ankle. And this was kind of, I don't want to say like that instance is kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy because, no one could have anticipated him like hitting his crew. However, it was kind of anticipated that pit stops were going to be his make or break. And unfortunately, it did break it because you looked at the pit stop practices that we had leading up to the 500. saw in any of the practices, like there were a lot of rookie mistakes that were happening. And I think we talked about it in the last episode as well. These types of mistakes happen. And it's really, really unfortunate that that is how his race had ended, was that crash. And, he was very graceful after the fact of being like, I am so sorry to like my team. And, he never wants anything to happen in terms of like hurting people, obviously. But so he ended up not finishing his race versus Callum Ilott, who has the experience and has, is kind of like I don't want to say like mentor role out of the two, but kind of like he's the experienced driver here. And, we're going to talk a little bit more about his ending with the 500. But from this standpoint, he finished in what, P12, I want to say?
I honestly can't remember, and I can't find where Callum finished on track.
Okay. Yeah, so I want to say he finished pretty high up there in the standings. My gut is telling me it's P12, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But, that kind of goes to show how experience is kind of king around the speedway. Is you had Robert, who was the rookie, got incredibly lucky with his car being able to put it on pole. But you have Callum, who has had that experience. This is like his fourth 500, I think. And, each time that he goes, he gets better and better, as everyone kind of does. And, he put up a solid set of points at the end of the race. But again, we'll talk a little bit more about this later on in the episode. But as a preview, he did end up being one of those cars that failed the post-race technical inspection, and so he got moved to the back of the grid, unfortunately, with the official standing. So through no fault of his own, Callum is finishing at the back of the grid. However, if you're just looking at the comparison of Callum versus Robert in racing and their finishings before all of that had happened, it kind of comes back to what I said last episode when we were talking about quali. I think Callum kind of outperformed Robert exactly the way that I thought he would. And so, one, that's encouraging for Callum. It sucks about his car, but I think Robert has a lot to learn from Callum, and it helps that both of them are Prema kids, through the Formula 2 series and obviously now being teammates. But experience matters around the speedway. And looking at those two, that shows exactly why. And so then that brings us to the next point that I said that I was going to be taking a look at from the last episode with Chevy versus Honda engines. So in the top 10, we had 4 Hondas and 6 Chevys. So it was a pretty good split, to be honest. But something that I thought was really interesting was that all 3 of the mechanical failures that happened in the race all were Chevys. So what does that tell us exactly? I don't quite know. Because they were all like they were different mechanical failures. Let me pull it up. So you had Ryan Hunter-Reay. I can't remember what his mechanical failure was. Do you remember?
No, I can't remember what his mechanical was. I know Joseph was with something with his fuel
Yeah,
line,
his fuel
fuel pump,
pressure.
something with fuel.
Yeah, his fuel pump or something like that. Hold on. I think I have it written down somewhere. Yeah, his fuel pressure, there was an issue with that. So Joseph ended up DNFing, which sucks for him because he was going for that three-peat despite starting at the back of the grid. And then you also had Alexander Rossi, who had a pit lane fire. So it was a whole thing with Rossi, and we're going to touch on that later. But all of that to say, mechanical failures, the 3 that happened were all Chevys, and Chevy was the one who decided to let their teams choose when they kind of put their new engines in for the running, but they all had to be done by carb day, so the Friday before the 500, whereas Honda had forced every single one of their teams, regardless, it didn't matter, they needed to be done before qualifying, so a week before. So it's just an interesting breakdown. I would love to get a little bit more information on all of those, but I can only get what I get from the IndyCar website, unfortunately. So, I think it's a pretty good split of the top 10, again, with 4 Hondas and 6 Chevys, but the only one that matters is the one who finished P1, and Alex Palou is in a Honda. So what does that say? I don't know.
Meg, I'll let you continue on with kind of discussing this next note on pit stops, kind of making that difference and what your kind of thoughts were on the different strategies and how those played out.
Yeah, so as any 500 really, I think pit stops are really going to make or break your race. I think Ryan Hunter-Reay is kind of the one who was unfortunate. That was the downfall of his race, was that last pit stop, unfortunately. He was running a phenomenal race, running on a totally different strategy, but I know he had stalled out and it was a long pit stop, and then you had the mechanical failure. So, that was just an unfortunate end to his race during that last pit stop. But, there were a couple different strategies that are all going to be, make or break for them. So for the top 12, all of them had a 5-stop strategy except for Christian Lundgaard, who had a 6-stop strategy. Not going to lie, I wasn't really paying attention to Christian Lundgaard's race at all, so I don't quite know why he had the extra pit stop, but worth noting. But you saw throughout the race that the cautions really made an impact on when you stopped as a driver. The first round of pit stops kind of came as a result of that first caution that came out. And you had like Alexander Rossi, Christian Rasmussen, and Devlin DeFrancesco. They were all on the strategy that stayed out longer on that first round of pit stops. And I honestly thought that that was really going to work for them. And then unfortunately, Rossi had his whole situation happen, and Christian kind of, being a rookie with this kind of stuff, didn't end up working out well in his favor. But Devlin was he was pretty high up there for a really, really long time. And so that was kind of surprising to see him be up there for so long. But yeah, the pit stop cycle really impacted the race in terms of who was up front for how long and at what time. And so, someone like Pato, who was kind of struggling to get back up into the front, he ended up being able to cycle his way through to be at the front at the right time, and worked out well for him there. But pit stops are king at the 500, and this really kind of showcased that really, really well.
Counter your statement about Christian Rasmussen a little bit though, because I mean he finished sixth in the race. So I think that's really a testament that like I think that strategy could have worked. He finished sixth, Lynn finished 11th. They both started a little bit farther back. I think it would have been really interesting. Unfortunately, Speedway had a day with the field. And the other main person who was running that strategy, who was higher up and at one point was even leading the race, was Alexander Rossi. The big fire meant that we did not get to see if there was a chance of that playing out in his favor. And I think that really, really could have been a very interesting thing to see play out when you consider that, Christian started behind him and was able to finish sixth on that. And I think he got caught up with a bad pit stop where it could have been even a closer thing towards the end as well.
Yeah, that was kind of my point with that, was that he was running a phenomenal race, and it was just kind of unlucky with that, where he had that bad pit stop. And it's such a shame. And I know we're going to talk about it, but I just have to say it is such a shame how Rossi's day had ended just because of how well he was running, because I do think that that was the right strategy for those two. And, you had Rossi, Christian, and even Ed Carpenter have 1, 2, 3 for a good amount of time. So I think that was the right strategy for them. But like you said, Speedway had a day, and, that was kind of unfortunately the result for them. So it is what it is.
Yeah, unfortunately. And I guess that'll carry us over into the next thing to talk about of good God, did the Speedway have a vengeance? It's like the racing god said, all y'all been about the lack of yellow flags? Fine, hold tight.
There were 45 caution laps. I totaled them up together. 5. That's insane.
That is insane. And on top of that, we had 10 cars, so nearly a third of the field did not finish the race, which is, oh, and I even forgot. Actually, it's 11 because I left out the one who crashed on the last lap. Oh, sorry, Nolan. Much like the broadcast, we cut away too soon. But yeah, I mean, just to kind of go through this list. So 11 cars did not finish. Literally a third of the field with 33 cars in it. That's an insane number. I haven't gone back and compared, and actually, that's something I may do before the next episode is just kind of look in comparison to IndyCar's past on how much this is in comparison. But that feels like a lot of cars to not have finished. And, kind of go through it. You have Scotty Mack crashes out on the pace lap, and that was his pure just devastation was heartbreaking. Like just standing in the infield crying, Carly coming up and just like giving him a big hug in the middle of an interview, like just so sad to
It was
watch.
devastating to watch that happen, but I know he said like, "Oh, like rookie mistake or, stupid mistake or whatever." But you do also have to remember that, like before the start of the race, it was kind of drizzling. And so, a little bit wet, not great, but the track was drying out, but there still probably were some damp, wet spots throughout the speedway. But then you also have tires that are cold and a track temperature that was at 72 degrees, which is cold. So, that combination of all of those things sucks. But, I feel bad. I was watching with my dad and I was like, saying all of these things that I just said and like, in defense of Scotty because I love him and I want to see him do well all the time. And my dad was like, yeah, all of those things are the same for all 33 drivers. And he was the only one that crashed. And I was like, that's ruthless, Dad. Okay, sure. I mean, he makes a good point. I hate to say it. He is the only
He's
driver that
not
did that.
wrong.
He's not wrong. But those things I think they could have honestly happened to anybody, considering all of those things were the same conditions for everybody else. It wasn't like, oh, he was the only one that was weaving to warm up his tires. Literally everyone was. And I think he was just the unlucky one that had happened to. But it really could have happened to anybody considering how bad those conditions were at the start of the race.
Well, and we almost saw it happen to Scott Dixon behind him too. And then his brakes caught fire. Thankfully, those went out. We did see that almost happen as well. And then, race goes green and we have Marco make it half a mile, if that, before he's out of the race. So it's just, I think the 35-minute rain delay, cold tires, cold engines, ish, slightly track, like it definitely played a factor.
Absolutely. So it was an unfortunate start to the race. And then, we're going to get into our next one, which we said we were going to touch upon again, is Alexander Rossi had the pit lane fire and his fueler was on fire. Like his hands were on fire, which was honestly incredibly scary because it wasn't just like, oh, the fueler person was on fire, oh, the brake was on fire, or like, the car itself was on. It was like also the fueler hose. Like the fuel itself was on fire. And I have never seen anything like that. And, that is the exact thing that happened in Formula One way back when they were still doing the fueling in F1. And I believe it was actually Jos Verstappen. So Max Verstappen's dad, who had that major fueler fire. And that was the whole reason why they stopped doing the fueling on pit stops in Formula One. So, it was incredibly scary to see, like in real time, live, to see that happen. And it just kind of goes to show you how quick that stuff can turn. Because it was like, oh, we see smoke, or is it steam? We don't know. He had an issue with his water the entire week leading up to the 500, and he had gone back into the garage and he got back to the pits or whatever the case may be because of some water leak that was happening. So it was like, is it smoke or is it steam? We don't know. And then all of a sudden the car's on fire, the fueler's on fire, the fueling hose is on fire, and it just was like incredibly scary to watch.
Yeah, no, that was terrifying. I mean, we have seen cars catch on fire before. That is not
Yeah.
new. I don't think we've ever seen it quite like this. Where like quite honest, I like thankfully Rossi's okay because that was very scary to see. He was panicking and it took him
Yeah.
a while to be able to get out of the car. Safety team it took a while to get it out and thank God Mike, who's the fueler who caught on fire, like Mike's okay. And he caught on fire as he was trying to put water on the fuel hose. But I'd say if he hadn't done that, we really could have run a whole risk of that whole pit lane literally blowing up because all their fuel lines are interconnected. Just it was so scary. Like it was not a fun moment to
No.
watch and I hope it's something we never have to see again because it is the reality of it could have been so much worse, so easily.
And like even worse is it happened to Rossi, who is a brand new dad, and Kelly and baby Ben were there. So like I can only imagine the panic that Kelly must have been going through at that time to see that happen and the fire not just be contained to the car but spread. and incredibly thankful. But I don't know what this will mean in terms of procedure stuff I don't know, because I feel like that shouldn't happen. There has to be some other safety precautions or like, fail safes that happen, but I don't know how that can change, but that was honestly terrifying. So, who knows?
Yeah, and I mean, we're not privy to how really the pit lanes are set up for that stuff. I'm sure they have to have stuff in place because they're not stupid. They didn't talk about it on this week's episode, but related specifically to the fire on off track. But James talked about something that he really would like to see come back out of all the crashes and everything that happened is that it used to be at the beginning of every season, all the drivers would have to sit through a briefing from the safety team on like these are the procedures on like an hour and a half presentation. This is what the safety team does. Kind of going back to like the issue, it was actually an issue with Carb Day and like blocking pit lane and like them because part of it is like the AMR safety team makes a barrier for the cars if there's been a big crash. And there was some issues with that. I found out after we recorded. I don't think I've actually mentioned that to you, where it was like Rossi with was it Kiffin's crash maybe? I don't remember who crashed, but they created like essentially, you had those big old trucks creating a big barrier that could easily take out an Indy car, but it's to the idea of protecting the drivers on there. The IndyCar is actually now going to put in spotters for the safety teams because prior to that on Friday, they didn't really have anyone being able to alert the safety team on, hey, there's still cars on track coming, even if they're at a slower speed, but this is where they are in relation to you. So, that's there. I think we're probably going to see based on that, based on, the fire and everything, what are we doing from procedures that need to happen? I also personally would, with how long it took Alex to get out of the car, for whatever reason that might be. Again, he hasn't talked about it yet on Off Track. I'm sure they'll cover it on their episode tomorrow, so that may give more insight. But like from an outsider viewer perspective, it looked like he was very much panicking, and that scares me when they're supposed to have, those jump tests that they're supposed to do to prove how quickly they can get out of the car. I would like to see if they're seeing that this could be an issue, that they are making them maybe have to do their jump tests more frequently just to ensure that that's all taking place the way it's supposed to. Because, we luckily nothing bad happened, but we were very close to something really, 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 really bad outside of Mike's hands getting burned. I don't want that to I don't want to see it. I don't want to see the panic of a driver who was God, he was mad. He was so mad after. And that was probably a lot of factors that built into that. But just like, I don't want to see any driver putting that risk. I don't want to see any teams putting that risk because we also saw Ryan Hunter-Reay's car catch on fire on during Carb Day as well. It wasn't to the same degree by any means, and he was in a little bit easier standpoint because it wasn't an active race to get away from other people. I think maybe IndyCar needs to look at what those procedures are just a little bit more detailed.
Son. And, I think, from watching what happened with Rossi, I don't think like I think a lot of it was for sure like him panicking trying to get out because you could see him like struggle to get the wheel out and to get out and like unbuckle and everything. But at first, I don't think he really understood what was happening. Like he had no idea that that was the reality of what was going on. And so I think that coupled with, oh, this is on fire, to then all of a sudden his race is entirely done, whereas I think before he was trying to wait it out, see if they could fix it, see if they could still continue running. Because, the amount of times that drivers will come into the pits that have an issue, you saw with Scott Dixon, his rear left was on fire and he just kind of waited it out and it ended up being fine. But, he did have to go into the pits. He did come out a couple laps down, but, these drivers are going to do everything in their power to stay in this race. And, I think that was kind of what it was. And then all of a sudden, it went from 0 to 100 real quick with the severity of the fire. And that kind of causes that panic. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know if the IndyCar drivers actually do jump tests. Do they?
Yeah, they have to do it at the beginning of the season as part of like when they do their physicals and all their medical stuff.
Is that the only time that they do it?
I think so.
That's
Don't
crazy.
quote me, but I think so.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy because, like, I know we constantly are saying, oh, we're not an F1 podcast or, like, whatever, but we do have to reference F1 a lot because a lot of fans are crossovers, and especially, like, myself, I was an F1 fan before being an IndyCar fan. So a lot of this reference point was coming as an F1 fan. They do randomly select drivers to do jump tests in F1. So, it's not just like oh, you get it done once and then you're set for the season. With F1 drivers, just like F1 cars will get randomly selected at the end of a race for technical inspection, the drivers will also get randomly selected to do the jump test and, emergency protocols. So it's crazy to me to know that as much as we praise the AMR safety team for being, the better safety team out of the two series, that this one thing, I think F1 actually does better than IndyCar, which is crazy for me to say. But just based off of that, you kind of have to admit that's not really something that Indy is strong in at this current moment.
Yes, I would agree. We'll come back to those who did not finish the race in a second, but literal breaking news on the podcast via IndyCar, who just posted it. Michael Cannon is now going to be lead engineer for Rinus VeeKay at Dale Coyne Racing for the remainder of the 2025 season. For those who may not know who Michael Cannon is, Michael Cannon was the technical director at AJ Foyt for quite a number of years. With that, before that, a little bit with Team Penske, so that's kind of with that technical relationship there. He was supposed to be the head engineer for Prema at the beginning of the season. I think we probably talked about at the very beginning how it was very kind of last minute, 2-3 weeks before the season started, that Michael Cannon announced that he was stepping away from Prema. It was all a little weird, kind of hidden in mystery, so we don't really know what went down, but everyone was just kind of like, okay, it's weird. So, as of 3 minutes ago on Wednesday, May 28th at currently 3:50 p.m., we just had news that he's going to be joining Dale Coyne. So that is, I think, really interesting and honestly probably a really good thing for Dale Coyne Racing and for Rinus. We've seen that Rinus has been able to, we say it a lot, but like it's really true for the Dale Coyne car. Not to keep referencing off track, but Rossi made the reference last week as a joke. He's like, with everything happening with Penske, he was like, you could take every car in the grid except for maybe Dale Coyne, and they're going to be the only one with an actual true legal car because they just don't have the money to do it. So I think this is a really cool get, very interesting get to see kind of what that plays out to be.
Yeah, I mean, we love Rinus on the podcast, so seeing that, he has this being lead engineer, I think it's going to be really good. Hopefully we'll see some good stuff come from this. Yeah, breaking news. We love when that happens.
It is. This is a lot more fun than the last time we had breaking news on the podcast.
Oh my God, so true.
Nobody's fired this time.
Yay! Someone's actually hired. Employment.
And I guess speaking of Rinus VeeKay, he was the
Yeah.
next one on that list that I had. If he ended up having a pit lane crash, which that was just weird. It kind of just seemed like he just lost control of the car and spun out.
He lost the rear, which seems to be the case with every
Story of
single
the
crash that
500.
happens.
Yeah.
It was unfortunate because he was running a fantastic race too. And, he's such a good driver. I feel so bad that he's in a car that does not perform well, and it's just really unfortunate to see that was the end of his race, was literally coming into pit lane.
Yeah, we already talked about Robert. Car kept going left, and it was not supposed to go left right then. He hit 4 of his guys. It was like he was bowling. He just took all 4 of them out, which like would be funny if it wasn't actually he just hit 4 people. He ended up it was actually his fueler, so another fueler injury. Weird. Okay, so that happened twice.
Weird day for fuelers.
Yeah, and he actually broke his feelers ankle, so that sucks. But it happens. I mean, it sucks. It happens. Kyle Larson DNF'd. And then he DNF'd from the 600 as well. So his double attempts ended in failures.
I wonder what that's going to mean for his Prime documentary or whatever, because wasn't he being followed by Amazon Prime for this documentary thing that was supposed to be done last year? But obviously, because the double didn't work out for him last year, they were hoping to do that this year, but he double DNF'd.
And I guess that'll be how that story ends because it's all been but said that he's not planning to run next year in the 500. I don't know. It kind of makes me want to watch the documentary more.
I mean, that's true. Yeah. Unfortunate for him.
Unfortunate for him. Yeah. And unfortunately with that, he took out 2 of my like mid-pack favorites, and Kiffin got taken out by Kyle Larson and Stingray Robb got taken out by Kyle Larson. Both of them had really hard hits. Luckily they're all okay, but like just nasty.
Yeah. especially Stingrays, because he went head first into the tire barrier. And luckily, barriers did exactly what they were supposed to do. But you take a look at those onboards, it's not pretty. And it was a pretty high impact crash for Stingray specifically. Again, going straight in to that barrier. Shout out AMR safety team.
Always. If we ever get merch, it's going to be AMR Safety Team, and you can come on the podcast anytime you want.
All right, write that down. Write that down.
The others, just to wrap this up so we aren't spending too long talking about just those who didn't finish the race. As Meg said, RHR, Ryan Hunter-Reay had a mechanical failure. Joseph Newgarden had a mechanical failure. And then poor Nolan Siegel ended up having the race end under yellow. I don't think it would have made a difference in that final outcome by any means because it was just like one turn left. But he had a pretty nasty crash, which I really hate. I understand, and we're not hiding it. Alex Palou won. Congratulations to Alex Palou. We will talk about that and everything in a second, at least very briefly. Yes, I get we need to focus that he just won his first oval. He just won the 500. But, can we not have at least gotten a, hey, Nolan Siegel's okay and out of the car? Because, yes, we need to focus on Palou, but, he just crashed his whole car. It's not that hard to be like, great, Nolan Siegel's okay. And now back to Alex Palou.
Yeah, especially because there was a lot of downtime in between different festivities happening with Alex Palou. There was some wait time that definitely could have been addressed. So, very unfortunate for our little baby bird who this was his first 500 that he qualified for because last year he was the one that was bumped, unfortunately. And he did the entire thing up until that last corner. I think it was in turn 3 that he was going into.
If Marco only did, half a mile, Nolan did 199 and 3/4 of one.
So very unfortunate. We're glad he's okay. I can't wait to see him actually finish the full 500. Hopefully next year.
Yeah. Next point we kind of had, I was almost right. I had a chance to call the whole thing correctly.
So close to being right. I was so excited for you for the longest time.
And then Conor had to go be Conor about it. In more ways than one, actually. Yes, with his race, but also what he said at the banquet after the race, where I'm like, Conor, nobody needed to know.
Okay, so to rewind it a little bit, Megan in our last episode had thrown out there that she thought Conor Daly was going to be able to win it. And for a long time, I really thought he was actually going to. I mean, the battle between Conor and David Malukas was crazy good. And it was some of my favorite racing that I saw during the 500. And I really, really, really thought that Conor had a chance to win it. He had a hell of a race. There was a hell of a battle with Malukas, but he lost his tires so drastically at the end of that stint. Then I feel so bad. They were broadcasting his radio messages to his team. And I honestly think it was through no fault of Conor's. It was entirely his team's strategy call where he was like, I need tires. I am losing them. And they were like, no, we need you to stay out 5, 6 more laps, 4 more laps. And he was like, I'm coming in. I got nothing on these tires. And he dropped all the way from first all the way back to 10th in a very quick period of time, and that just completely ruined his chances. I really thought he had it.
Yeah, just disappointing. Good race for David. We'll touch
Great race for David.
On that though, we'll touch on it. P3 finished on track, P2 in the final standings. We'll talk on. We're almost to that. Talking on that. Conor Daly though did not need to tell us that he peed his pants before the start of the race and then ran 200 laps sitting in his own urine. Conor, no one would have ever known. No one would have ever known. And you stand in your fancy little suit up on the stage at the banquet and tell the whole world. Why? Why, Conor? Come on the podcast. Tell me why.
Here's the thing is that that's not a new piece of information that people care to know. That has been discussed in the past with any racing driver. That is such a common question that they do get asked is well, what happens if you have to go to the bathroom? Well, half the time, some of them are just yeah, well, you can't really do anything about it. It's in the middle of the race. So sometimes you really just gotta go. And others are no, that's gross. But is not something that you need to bring up at the banquet. That doesn't feel like the appropriate time or place. And like you said, no one needed to know and no one would have known. And
It
then
was
you just went
unprompted.
and voluntarily told everybody.
No one asked. Like, okay, James Hinchcliffe like peed himself at Barber during a rain delay in like 2015. Okay, the world knew because he got caught out of his car right after. Like, that sucks, but at least that makes sense. Connor, nobody asked you. You just got up on stage and told the whole world. Like,
What was the reason?
have some decorum. You're at a banquet, and that's the thing that you could get up on the stage and say anything about your race, and that's what you choose to go with.
It's Conor Daly. What else do we expect, to be honest? Let's be real here. He was going to be the one.
Anyways, Alex Palou won
Anyways.
its first oval race, and it happened to be the biggest race of the year.
Shout out Alex Palou. I think he does what he does best. He was clinical, and it was honestly very fun to watch. You know, out of all of the drivers, I think this is a very fun little statistic for me is, and we've kind of talked about this before, is that he doesn't run out front very often during his races. He only led 14 laps out of the entire 500. You know, like that's not a lot. 14 out of 200 laps is not a lot. Whereas like you have someone like Takuma Sato who, you know, led 51. That was the most out of anybody. But it doesn't matter how many laps you lead. It matters that you are the one that's leading on the last lap. And that is exactly what Palou did. I think he ran a really smart strategy with using the draft, and he was patient. He was, I'm going to wait and I'm going to sit here nice and pretty in the draft. And, you know, I think there was a lot of conversation about, oh, well, is he going to have the tires at the very end of the race? Is he going to have the fuel? And he was smart. He made the right choices, and it turned out to be exactly what he needed to do to win. And honestly, it was fun to watch. I really, really enjoyed watching that. And it does kind of suck that, you know, the majority of the last few laps of it that we were all kind of like waiting with bated breath about is, well, they're all like the leaders are stuck behind the last two cars that were doing swapsies on, you know, for like the last position of the race. And that was kind of holding up the leaders. That's going to be something that we talk about a little bit later too. But yeah, I think that kind of played into why Palou did win, you know, because you had Marcus Ericsson who was on the right strategy and did not need fuel save, did not need to manage his tires at the end. And it just so happened that he was the one that got stuck in that, you know, last place battle. And Palou bid his time and did the right overtake at the right time and just went from there.
Yeah. I will say, as a clarification, it was the last two laps on the last two cars on the lead lap.
On the lead lap. Yeah,
not
forgive me.
race.
Yeah. Sorry. It was on
Just
the
because I
lead
do think that is an important distinction between the two.
because they
You know,
didn't have to move over because they were still on the lead lap. And like that is a piece of information that a lot of people either one don't know or two strongly disagree with. But they're still on the lead lap, you know. They
They're
don't
right.
have to move, and they didn't. As is their right. Is it annoying? Absolutely, but it's still within their right.
Yeah. Shout out to Alex Palou. Well done, sir. That's all I got.
Yeah, it
You
was
can
very
take Detroit off. As Scott Dixon said, he will pay for your whole vacation. Take a week off. We'll see you in Gateway.
I mean, you look at his postings on socials, whether that's through like the Chip Ganassi Instagram or like the official IndyCar Instagram, he's looking tired. He is really tired, and he deserves a week rest. Take
Motor City
Scott
does it,
Dixon up
Nina.
on his offer.
It'll be fine.
It's
Just
fine.
we'll see you in Gateway. It'll be fine.
Yeah, it's all fine. Alex Palou, you have earned yourself a vacation. Just go for it.
All right. So not last thing, getting close to our last thing with this, but things that came out and kind of ties into how we started the show. And that again goes back to, stuff we talked about last week too, of if this was different cars, would it be handled differently? I think to an extent we kind of saw that it was. That is to say that we had 3 cars fail post-race inspection. I don't know why I've said post-lane. All failed post-race inspection. That was the number 28 of Ericsson, the number 27 of Cal Kirkwood, and the number 90 of Callum Ilott. This does mean that, Marcus Ericsson went from second in the race in what was a really tough final finish to finish P2 to finishing first. Kirkwood finished 32nd, and now Callum Ilott, to quote Will Powers, in P30 less. What happened? So some rule violations that occurred. I went to Meg's favorite, the handy dandy rule book on this. And by that, I mean I found it online and copied what they had said. But rule violations for Andretti actually happen to be the same for both cars. So this is actually kind of interesting too. That's similar to Penske, where it was only found on 2 of the 3 cars. This is also what we saw with Andretti here. Marcus and Kyle both had modified energy management system covers for that, and as well as unapproved spacers and parts for the cover to A-arm mounting points. I'm not our specs person. I don't really know what these mean, but whatever that happens to be. Essentially, these are parts that are not supposed to be modified. With this, 3 rules that got kind of violated. First was Rule 9.3.1. Also had this as an improper conduct. This is essentially just an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. So I think any team that kind of has a rules violation ends up getting this to some regard, essentially saying like, hey, you broke an IndyCar rule. It's not okay. That's unsportsmanlike. Here's a rule violation on top of the ones that you already got. The other 2 rules that that Andretti ended up breaking were rules 14.1.2 and 14.1.3. 14.1.2 is talking about that modifications must be approved 7 days before the parts are used, and 14.1.3 is talking about that all parts must be provided by an approved supplier. So the fact that they essentially modified these parts on their car means that they are out of regulation with our semi-spec series that is IndyCar. Mike's covered this in depth on earlier episodes, so if you really want to know what that means, go back and listen to that there. And then with Callum, he also had that improper conduct, unsportsmanlike penalty violation, as well as Rule 14.7.6.4, which has to do with the front wing design. I'm saying his front wing wasn't high enough. I came out with a statement after that, essentially saying that, every tech inspection before this, we've been in regulation. Most likely it just wore down during the race, which is not uncommon for this to happen. It sucks for Callum, sucks for Marcus and Kyle, because again, going back to what I said with the stuff with Penske last week, the drivers are not in charge of what is happening with their cars. Their job is to get into them and drive them until they're told to not drive anymore. They are not responsible for what is happening with these car creations, so it just kind of sucks that, it's a team sport. They're held accountable for all parts of it, but, they go out and do their job, and for factors not of their own, kind of get demoted towards the end. It just sucks. With this too, this meant, as far as those rule violations, they were dropped to the back of the field. As I already said, each car was fined $100,000, and then their team managers were suspended for 1 race, which will be served in Detroit.
Yeah, quite unfortunate for all 3 of them. I mean, especially, I will say, I think, honestly, I know Marcus Ericsson is probably not going to be happy when I say this. I am glad he didn't win, because imagine, Marcus Ericsson wins. He gets the wreath, he gets the milk, he gets, the fame and glory and all of that kind of stuff, and the whole spectacle of winning, only to then, come out a couple days later saying that, oh, he failed technical inspection, and all of a sudden his race win is taken back. And now let's say Ericsson did win and Palou did come in second. I know Palou wouldn't have been happy getting a 500 win after the 500 happens. Like, no driver is going to want that. Pato has said in the past as well, especially with all of the stuff being dragged up with Penske, with Penske cheating and people talking about like, well, did Joseph's car have this last year at the 500 and blah, blah, blah. He was like, I don't want to get a 500 win after the fact. And I don't think any driver would. So as much as it sucks that Ericsson didn't win, I know he probably would not have wanted to win and then have it be stripped. So in the grand scheme of things, glad it turned out the way that it did. It just kind of sucks for Kyle, for Marcus, and for Callum. I think they ran fantastic races, and it just sucks that they're now at the back of the grid.
Concur. Yeah, that's kind of it on that. Meg, do you want to lead into this next one? So I think
Yeah,
we have
so
differentiating opinions on the matter.
kind of differentiating opinions. I think everyone who has listened to the podcast knows that I am a Pato fan, and I think he's had his heart broken at the Speedway so many times that I think he's just over it. And I think we start to get a little bit more of his personality with his post race comments, depending on how well he does just in general. I think we're starting to see that more and more, regardless of the race. But it kind of really came to fruition at the end of this 500 where, Arrow McLaren does their videos the same way that, most teams do, where they have the team principal, they have, the drivers say a little tidbit about their race and how, you get the very PR answers from all of them, we did the best that we could. It was a shame that it didn't, pan out the way that we wanted to. We got some solid team points and, on to Cincinnati kind of thing. With Pato's post race comments, he was not the PR perfect persona that we get usually from him. And he was saying that it was like a really boring 500. And he was saying how he felt bad for the fans that they had to watch such kind of like a disastrous 500. And like he even said on some of his radio broadcasts too about like with the restarts, how we would get, a caution for a couple of laps and then all of a sudden we would go green again. And then all of a sudden, cars didn't know how to act and that caused another caution. And it was a lot of stop and go with the caution flags, especially in the first half of the race. And so he was very vocal about that kind of thing. And with cars not getting out of the way and that kind of stuff. I don't think he was wrong in anything that he was saying. I just think that it wasn't the perfect PR persona that we're so used to from Pato. And, maybe he could have done it in a better way, said it in a nicer, kinder way, maybe, but I don't disagree with what he was saying. I will disagree with the fact that he said it was a boring 500. I don't think it was boring at all. I think maybe his race was boring just from how things were falling in terms of cautions and pit stops and trying to maneuver through traffic. But I don't think it was a boring race at all, actually. Yeah, I think we just kind of lost perfect PR persona from Pato. Man, that was perfect alliteration.
I don't think I agree with his statements to begin with. One, I don't think the race was boring. Two, the cars that were ahead had the right to be ahead. Like, to me, like, yes, I agree. Yeah, it wasn't the perfect PR answers that we normally get from him, but which I think is fine. I think he's in his right to show his personality. I like when they actually show their personalities. What really irritates me is how, like, it just comes off as, like, bitter and kind of bratty of it's just like, well, I didn't win, so everything sucks. Like, it's just like, I don't know, it almost had like an entitlement feeling to me that I'm just like, get over yourself almost. Of it's just like, yeah, you didn't win. Yeah, you wanted to win. Of course, every driver in that field wanted to win this race. And I think it's just the way he came off. And I think it's almost to the point we've seen Pato grow in some regards and the way he's acted in the last 6 months almost bigger than IndyCar or perceived as bigger than IndyCar. And now that like he's not maybe getting the results that he wants and he's not getting the attention because there is kind of getting almost a bite back from those who are kind of tired of it to an extent, that now he's coming, it's just, I don't like how it portrayed. I don't like how he came off, and it just came off very just like bitter and tired, and it's like, oh, I didn't win, so everything sucks. And it's just like, cool, you also have 32 other drivers in the field who didn't win and probably feel the same way. But I don't know, it put kind of a sour taste in my mouth to basically just sit here and dog on everything when it's like, it wasn't a bad race by any means. I don't think it was a boring 500. I don't think it was a boring month of May. I don't know. I didn't sit well with me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so tough because he is one of those people that is kind of the face of IndyCar, and he's been told that repeatedly, for a very long time. He is one of the most popular drivers on the entire grid. He is one of the most well known. And I think, yeah, sure, it is kind of coming from probably a place of ego, but honestly, all of these drivers have a massive ego. I feel like that's almost kind of like a requirement. And I just think that he had a moment where he let his ego get the best of him. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I just think that's what we saw on social media, unfortunately. But I don't know.
I think a lot of it just comes down to like the fandom that's been created around Pato. I was going to say to no fault of his own, but actually it's completely to fault of his own. He has carefully crafted this narrative, and it's almost just like either you have to massively be for Pato or you're in the wrong, sometimes is how his fan base comes off. And like reading through some of the comments that were on the post that he made, it was very, and like other people, like both media and just fans kind of reaching out after the comments he made both in the video and in just like his IndyCar interviews. It was, you have people who are saying they're defending him completely that are very much like almost, I don't know what's the word, like I think I've used the word like it's the boy bandification of IndyCar before. At least I know we've have discussing it. I don't know if I've used it on the podcast. And I think we saw that from a fandom perspective, and then you see everyone else just kind of being like, oh, you're coming off a little too like too big for what the reality of it's like you are not bigger than the series.
But I think this goes down to conversations that I know you and I have had privately about how kind of Fox has been portraying him specifically. Like, he has curated an entire media presence for himself that I think up until this year was not to the extent that we're seeing right now. Like you said, it is kind of the boy bandification of it. And I think a lot of that started, at least for me, when Pato's commercial came out for Fox, where, you have both Alex Palou and Joseph Newgarden had those two commercials as well for them. And they were focused on them as racers, whereas Pato's he's the heartthrob. He's, the one that does the cool stuff online, and he has the fandom, and, he's a one-man boy band. He's the heartthrob. You either love him or you love him kind of thing. That, to me, seems that Fox is trying to spin him in a way that I really don't think he has curated himself prior to Fox. I think, he has absolutely kind of put himself in that position where he kind of let it happen. And, he's an attractive young man. I'm the first one to admit that. He's attractive and he plays on that for sure. But, with a growing fan base, to me it's very reminiscent of like Lando Norris fan base, where you have people who are just crazy diehards. And I say this as also a Lando Norris fan, but I think going back to the quote unquote boy bandification of, motorsport and stuff, you have fans who kind of go too far, and that kind of also plays a part of it. Is less so necessarily about, well, what did he say that I don't necessarily agree with, to, oh my god, all of a sudden your fan base is just blindly following and sees nothing wrong with it. Going back to exactly what Pato said, I don't disagree with what he said necessarily. I do disagree with the fact that he said it was a boring 500. I do disagree with the fact that he said it was a crap 500. I don't think that was the case at all. What I do kind of agree with is, I think because of the last lap, the last two cars on the lead lap battling it out, we did kind of miss out on a really intense, what could have been finish. Sure. But I think being a part of a fan base and being a fan of anything is also being able to be critical of what you are a fan of. So to some extent, yeah, I kind of agree with what Pato said. I do think that, we lost a little bit of a spectacle with the last lap with the finish. But at the same time, I can also disagree with him saying that, no, I don't think it was boring at all. Maybe his race again was boring for him and his own personal, viewpoints of what he did. Maybe he thought it was boring, but I don't agree with that part. And that's being a critical person. That's like something that you need to be critical of is, all right, well, my favorite can also sound stupid sometimes. Do I think he did kind of sound like a brat? Yes. Do I disagree with everything he said? No. But I don't know.
I want to go back to what you were saying though, of like you think this is on Fox. I don't think it's on Fox. I think Fox amplified what we were already seeing in that Pato was a brand. We did not know Patricio O'Ward. We do not know that. We know the brand that he has curated for us to see. Fox has amplified that to an extent, but I think that was already happening without that. And I think to the statements, it just kind of goes back to, and I will fully say, I think a lot of it is his fandom's reaction to it that probably bothers me more. Like, I will fully admit to that, that it is that kind of blind faith following of, oh, he said it, so he's right. And I think, that's what's happening online a lot, where I do not like it. And I think we have been seeing it this whole year, that the way he has been presented to his own doing as a brand has almost tried to seem like he is bigger than IndyCar. And I'm like, at the end of the day, you are not bigger than the sport that you are in. Like, you're not. I'm not. In and of itself, are some of the things he said as statements probably true? Yes, I think there is truth to what he was saying. I think I take bigger issue, I guess, is with how he said it, coming off very arrogant, very bitter, very, very bratty, to use that word again. I get being upset. You have right to be upset. This race means everything to him. He wants to win this race. I fully get the emotion behind it. I don't care for the tone, and that's a me thing. And then it's also just the reaction of it just being like the lack of criticism on him. And if you criticize Pato, then you're in the wrong sort of thing. And that just never sits right with me when, again, a fandom thinks they're above what they're an entity of. And I don't want Pato or any of them to be bigger than the sport. I think it still needs to be, it's like IndyCar is the importance of the sport, and everything else needs to go with that to a point.
So then how do you fix that then? Because that's not necessarily an issue with IndyCar then. If we're taking that viewpoint of things, it's, how do we moderate that online?
And I don't know if it can. I think it's just I mean, we both come from fandom spaces in
Yeah.
multitudes of ways. We come from a boy band space. So I think that's where that critical lens comes from, of like, we have seen this before. We have seen this kind of blind faith before when it comes to boy bands, when it comes to One Direction, when it comes from 5 Seconds of Summer. Like, you and I both know what this looks like, and that's what I'm seeing here. And I don't know what the fix is. I don't know. I'm not going to claim to know. I don't, it's frustrating for me because don't want, I don't want one driver or a handful of drivers to be the face of everything that's happening, that we lose the importance of the sport.
But again, I know you said it's not necessarily Fox's fault, but it kind of is because they only picked Palou, Joseph, and Pato. And they picked them because of who they are to the series. You have the 3-time champion. You have Joseph, who is the back-to-back winner. Then you have Pato, who, one, isn't an IndyCar champion, and two, hasn't won the 500. So why was he chosen? He was chosen for his brand. And like you said, we do come from fandom spaces, but we are also 30 years old. We have been through multiple fandom spaces. And, to generalize his own fandom, it does tend to be younger females. And we have been in those spaces. We are those spaces. And, it's something that I think comes with time and with age and with experience, that we are able to take a step back and be hypercritical because we can, one, recognize our own biases. Like I said, Pato's my favorite. He's the driver that I root for, but I can also have the ability to criticize what he says and what he does. That again only comes from time and experience within fandom spaces and people learning through experiences that you don't have to blindly follow these people.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. Like I said, I don't know what the solution is. I think, and it's not to put this all on Pato, but I think it's just the unfortunate reality is, if you've built your brand this way, then you have to be a little cognizant of what your fandom's going to do with what you're saying. And that's not fair to him. I'm well aware that that's not fair to him. I just think that's the unfortunate reality of maybe where I don't know. I don't know what it is. I just think, that's why we have a podcast to be able to just discuss on both sides of things.
Oh, absolutely. See, again, this is the kind of thing that's necessary when we have these discussions, though, is two differing opinions or two different perspectives on the same exact thing helps you be critical of, instances that may come up again in the future. Because I guarantee you, this is not going to be the last time that we, unfortunately, will discuss something along these lines. But again, he is kind of the big name that people do know. And so he does kind of have to put himself in a different perspective and a different standard, unfortunately, he has to kind of behave better than the rest. And I don't think that he did. And again, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I just think that maybe we need to be a little more critical and understanding the facets of it as like a fandom space. But, maybe he also needs to be a little more self-aware. Maybe, this is like the one-off instance or something where it's like, yeah, emotions ran high. I didn't really mean for that to come off the way that it did necessarily. Who knows? But
Well,
different perspectives are necessary.
I don't think it's bad that this was a crack in the PR facade. I would like to see more of actual Pato, not the brand that he's created.
100%.
I think it's just and I guess maybe this is just like this is a media standpoint kind of idea. The marketing that he as a brand has created, not just McLaren, not just Fox. Again, they have amplified this. But
Yeah.
somewhere in his team, they have created this as a brand. There has to be kind of like that cognizance of eventually, if you put up too much of a facade and then those cracks start showing, you're gonna see that full repercussion. I don't want that for Pato. I'm not saying I want that. So like don't get that misconstrued by any means. I don't know. I don't know. It's all an interesting.
Yeah, I guess we'll see how it kind of plays out with post 500. And I'm going to be interested to see if any of that gets touched on within Detroit happening this week, within media or interviews or, whatever happens online. But, we are very big advocates of wanting to grow IndyCar as a sport. And I feel like this might be one of those downsides of growing it as a sport is that maybe some of these things are getting too big for what we currently have. And then all of a sudden, no one knows how to adjust to it. And maybe that's part of the issue.
So I guess we can leave that where it's at. I also want to point out happy 1 year anniversary of us. Our first episode literally dropped today, a year ago.
Oh my God, I didn't realize it was today. But yeah, I wasn't going to mention at the very end. We are officially 1 year into this podcast. How are we feeling about it?
I mean, I'm enjoying it. I hope our listeners are too.
Yeah, we're here a year later, so clearly we enjoy doing it.
All right, our standings at current to do this. Top 10, as we always do. David Lucas is now in 10th, Colton Herta in 9th, Will Power in 8th, Scott McLaughlin in 7th, Scott Dixon in 6th, Kyle Kirkwood is in 5th. In 4th is Felix Rosenquist, 3rd, Christian Lungar, 2nd, Pato O'Ward, and your current reigning NTTT Firestone car, whatever the hell this series name is called. I should latest Indy 500 winner. You can't stop him. He is inevitable. He is 202 points above second place right now. Alex Palou.
Yeah, like you said, he is inevitable. He's such a generational talent. It's annoying.
But we should all also be very thankful that we are getting to watch Alex
Yes.
Palou. Like getting to live in the time of watching Alex Palou do this because it's not going to be forever.
No.
We're getting a car change in 2 years. He's not going to race for forever, but he is here, and we need to be thankful that we are getting to watch this generational talent while we have the chance to.
And we also need to be thankful that, again, I know we've said it before, but we need to be thankful that he is actually as nice as he seems. Like when we saw him at Barber, he was just like, oh, hi, good morning. Like he's just a good person.
Ran past us on his scooter. Hi, ladies.
It's just so nice. And like, I love to watch good people win. And I don't think that that should be a drastic statement, but like, apparently it is to some people.
Real
I don't know.
controversial, apparently.
Apparently that's controversial, but I like to see the people who win actually be good humans. And he just is. So we're lucky to live in the prime of Alex Palou.
But he can still take off Detroit, and it would be okay.
Or just like any race for the rest of the season.
He could technically take off 3 races right now, come back, and still be winning.
That's annoying.
Yeah.
Alex, you deserve a vacation, buddy. Go for it.
Take off
Let
the whole month
someone
of June.
else have a chance, and you
We
can
can
still
see
come
you
back
in Road
and win
America.
it.
All right. Are we done?
I think that's it.
Okay. Follow us on our socials, TikTok and Instagram, Racing Thoughts Podcast, Twitter, Racing One Thoughts. As we touched on last week, we are changing up our format, which means our recording days are changing and our posting days are changing. And we should be back on June 9th, I believe, with our next episode. So we will be I guess covering everything coming back from Detroit and going from there with our little bit of new format. If you like this episode, please go rate us 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening for. Please feel free to leave a comment. We will read those. If you leave a 5-star review, we'll definitely read that and give you a shout out here. Because we love the thoughts and we want to continue to get better at this. So, yeah.
Happy 1 year anniversary as well. Yay. All right. Bye.